unfold all that is going on and thinking of the Middle East and the crises and the kudzu type effect it has, the yeast-like effect of how it spreads and with its tentacles takes over the better part of the world. And what I see happening in the young of this world is that very few of them have models left anymore, so that they could look to someone and say, that's the way I want to model my life. When hate is sown, when discord is sown, when unhappiness is sown, when vengeance is sown, that's what sprouts up in the next generation. And so what I want to talk to you about, ladies and gentlemen, in the few minutes that I'll take here, is a question that Solomon asked of himself. What is worthwhile to do under the sun? This was a man who fed 14,000 at his palace every day. He said he had accumulated and accomplished more than anybody in his time. He had a harem. He was an architect. He'd built beautiful buildings. He knew all about agriculture. And he said, at the end of it all, I came to this question. What is worthwhile to do under the sun? Is it all a chasing after the wind? And so I say to you that at the bottom line of all that goes on is this unanswered question. What makes your life worthwhile? And what makes my life worthwhile? When I was 17, I was on a bed of suicide. I'd never opened a Bible in my life. I'd never opened a religious book in my life. Unlike John, who was a good student, I was at the opposite end of the spectrum. I was addicted to failure because my goals were on the sports field. I didn't like books. I didn't like reading. I just wanted to play cricket. And when my father took us to church, I decided to memorize the prayer book so that I would know how long we were from finishing this thing. And I knew exactly at about the 7-minute mark to go. When the vicar would say, let us by faith, therefore draw near by faith, I said, 7 minutes to go, and we're out of here, That's all the religiosity I had. And now as I think of all that happened, when I was 20, my father sent my older brother and me to Canada. He was 22. He got his job with IBM, became a systems engineer. He started his own high-tech company. And I was in the hospitality industry, wanted to do 1 or 2 years of internship before going on to Cornell. And as I was working in that hotel industry night after night, the managing director, the chef, and I would have dinner every night. And the conversation around that table was brand new to my thinking. I was only 20. I'd left home. I'd come to the West. I thought I was coming to the utopia, and all the schemes I would see these boys were making at the end of the day. I thought, wow, is this what they really want to do at 11 o'clock every night after they finish? And one day while he was literally grabbing me by the arm, he said to me, when are you going to become a man? Because he wanted me to go to one of the places they haunted. I looked at him, I said, Mr. Stanway, sir, you are my boss. But can I ask you just one question? Every night when you and Tony go out, you give me the keys to lock up everything. All the liquor, all the monies, all that's of value here. You give me the keys to lock it up. Why do you do that? He said, because I trust you. I said, sir, if tonight I go out with you and you cause me to violate one of my convictions, will you trust me again after that? He said, Ravi, I will never ask you to do that again. And the day I stepped out of there, a couple of years later, and went into my studies in theology and philosophy, changing dramatically from the business world, Mr. Stanway walked me to the door, put his arm around my shoulder. He said, this is the logical outworking of who you are. If you ever want to return, our doors will be open for you, but I don't think I'll be seeing you again. You see, there's a question you have to answer and that I have to answer. And I live on the road 50% of my life. I remember speaking to the Atlanta Braves and the Cardinals. They were playing against each other at Turner Field. You speak first to the opposing team, then speak to the home team. I pray for neither of them for victory that night, or that'll be my last event to come to. So at the end of that, I spoke to them I said, I look at you boys with muscles like watermelons. I said, I walk in here as the only one who fails the physical. I said, what am I going to talk to you about? How to knock a ball out of the park? I said, I can't even see it when you guys have knocked it out of the park. I said, I can't talk to you about baseball. I said, I can't even talk to you about cricket. I said, but what I can talk to you about is how to live your life on the road, because I spend more time on the road than probably most of you have. Because I'm 40 years as an itinerant now. This year, I'll spend over 200 days on the road. In the last 6 weeks, I've been to 8 countries. And straight from here, I'm on to Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, a few others. That's the way my life is. I'm an itinerant. I said, I want to talk to you about how to live your life on the road. There was a big hitter on the team. He came over to me, and I thought he would break my back the way he hugged me. And I've got a broken back already with titanium rods in there. He wrapped his arms around me, put his head on my shoulder, and wept and said, I wish I had heard this talk when I was starting out. Today I have all the money I've ever wanted, but very little of any real value in life. My call travel assistant was standing one step next to me. He just moved away to allow this big guy to weep on my shoulder and open his heart. Lee Iacocca said this in his straight talk. As I start down the twilight years of my life, I try to look back and figure out what it was really all about. I'm still not sure, he says, what all of this was meant to be and what is really the meaning of fortune and success. I know fame and power are for the birds, but then life suddenly closes into focus, and there stand my kids, and I love them. No matter what you've done for yourself or humanity, if you haven't given love and attention to your own family, I ask you, what have you really accomplished? This is Iacocca. He's moving in the right direction. I want to give you 3 principles as quickly as I can. And I promise you, you take these principles and apply it in your inner life, success is truly defined by them. Gideon is taking 32,000 men to face a daunting enemy. He thinks he needs a big army. And if he's got the big boys on his side, 32,000 of them, he's outnumbering the opposition. And God says, you've got a problem. You've got too many. He says, what do you mean you've got too many? This enemy is huge. He says, no. You've got too many. So he says, give them a choice. Those who are really afraid of this fight, let them leave. Don't judge them. Ask them the question. If they're fearful, let them go. 1/3 of them said they were terrified of this battle. 22,000 of them left. He's left with 10,000. God says, you've still got too many. I'm going to help you choose. All you need is about 300 of them. He said, take them to a river and let them take a drink to refresh themselves. A handful of them will drink this way. A handful of them will drink that way. Those that drink it as they cup their hands, they are the ones I want you to have. You take them, and it ended up being 300. Now, what was going on here? What were these men thinking? When they went to the water to kneel and drink before a battle, they weren't suspecting at all what was going on. And the reason is this. Please hear me. Anything that refreshes you without distracting you from, diminishing, or destroying your final goal in life is a legitimate pleasure. Anything that refreshes you without diminishing, distracting, or destroying the final purpose in life is a legitimate pleasure. We need refreshment in our lives. I was in Jakarta, Indonesia 2 weeks ago, speaking to the Lippo Group people. And the CEO of the Lippo Group, after I'd spoken 6 times and been there, did something for my wife and me we'd never had done before. And you know, when you're a public speaker, you don't like to tell these stories because it doesn't really serve your purpose. But I'll tell you what he did. He said, Ravi, you've been on the road for so long. I've set aside 5 days to give you and your wife a break. And he brings in his plane and he flies us to a tiny little island where there's a yacht waiting with his crew. And my wife and I, we've been married 42 years. And he puts Margie and me in that yacht. And we are cruising for 48 hours to the pristine blue waters of Indonesia. And one night we are standing in front of an island where we pull over, and in this mangrove see nearly 1 million bats take off to go for their feed and come back at dawn the next day. Then we went to Komodo Island, where there's about 2,000 of these huge dragons. And we're watching them. And we come back, and then he's flies us on to Bali, where we spent 2 nights, and then I went on to Singapore to speak. My wife flew back to Atlanta. She writes and she says, "Thank you for 5 beautiful days." Refreshment. To have the one you love and to have the beauty around you. So enriching. But you know, you've got to be careful with what refreshes you so that it doesn't take away from you the ultimate purpose of what life is all about. I wrote to James Riadi and I said, "James, I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did for my wife and me for these 5 days. Never had anything like this. Thank you, sir." And he just wrote back and said, "God bless you. I'm glad you went away from there rested." What is your purpose in life? You know, ladies and gentlemen, if you desacralize life at its essence, everything becomes profane. As Chesterton said, there's only one angle at which you can stand straight, and many, many other angles at which you can fall. Here's the point. A man comes to Jesus and says, "Is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar?" I truly wish Jesus had answered that differently. It's one of the most hurtful answers he ever gave, especially on April 15th. Jesus said, "Do you have a coin?" He said, "Yes, give it to me." He looked at the coin and looked at the man and said, "Whose image is on this?" He says, "Caesar's." He says, "Give to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and give to God that which belongs to God." As an apologist who does open forums, the questioner should have had a comeback question. The comeback question should have been, what belongs to God? You know what Jesus would have said? Whose image is on you? If the image of Caesar is on the coin, give to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. Give to God that which belongs to God. Do you know the Judeo-Christian worldview is the only worldview that pays you that great compliment? Imago Dei, you are created in the image of God. I cannot violate you. I cannot desacralize your life. I have no right to take that which is sacred of yours. Which leads me to the second. Secondly, as Gideon and all go on to battle, David is in battle as well. Most of our characters revealed in battle. David is in battle and he's thinking back of home and he says, "Oh my, a drink from my well at home in Bethlehem, what a delicious thing it would be." You know, I travel a lot. I used to live in Toronto for 10 years. My wife's Canadian. One of the things I loved to do when I came back to Toronto was to take a drink out of the faucet. Because in Toronto, one of the cities I lived in, the water comes so cool and refreshing. You go straight, you don't need to go to the fridge, just go to the faucet. I don't know whether the land is so frozen most of the time that keeps the water cold. I don't know what it is. Just enjoy it. Now when I come back to Atlanta, once upon a time when I first moved to Canada, the Indian restaurants in this part of the world were a disgrace. Now they're some of the finest in the world. And I come to Atlanta and my wife knows exactly where we're going to go the first night. Go out and have a nice dinner at the Indian restaurant there called the Palace. But more than that, just to get into my bed again after being on the road, my own bed. When you're traveling, you have those dreams of home, what you want to do. David says, "I wish I could get a drink of water from my well." 3 of his biggest fighters get behind the enemy ranks, get to that well, fill up a pitcher, come back to him. Ta-da! Want a drink, David? And David is about to pour it, and he says, "Where do you boys get this from?" So David, "It's from your well in Bethlehem." So how did you do it? So we snuck behind enemy lines. "You guys put your life in jeopardy?" "Yes, sir. We admire you. We love you. Want you to have it." David's about to put it to his mouth, takes it down, pours it onto the ground and says, "I cannot jeopardize the sacred right of another person to enjoy something for my pleasure." If he had reacted the same way when he saw Bathsheba, all of Old Testament history would have been different. Ladies and gentlemen, especially to you gentlemen, I want to say this. We need to know where our boundaries are, where the lines are that we need to draw. What is sacred? What is fulfilling? And I know whereof I speak. 4 decades on the road and the temptations never diminish. There's always somebody who wants to buy you. It's always somebody who wants you to cross a boundary. And as Chesterton said, whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put up there in the first place.
You've been watching Let My People Think with Dr. Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support. If you'd like to know more about this ministry or would like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766 or visit us online at www.rzim.org. You can also stay connected to RZIM through Twitter and Facebook. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 921-939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010.
My honor to be with you here at Princeton. When I was in Germany.
India, very close to Bangladesh.
George Washington University.
The Middle East.
Meetings in Angola prison.
United States.
From China.
In Canada.
In the United Kingdom.
In Istanbul, in Ankara, and Izmir.
Romania.
At American University.
In the University of Harvard.
Manila in the Philippines.
Perth, Australia.
To South Africa.
In Africa.
To Malaysia, to Indonesia, to Singapore. The mission of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries is really to reach the thinker and the skeptic, to answer the questions, and do evangelism undergirded by apologetics, in clearing all of the obstacles that stand in the way so that the questioner can take a direct look at the cross of Jesus Christ. We put it simply, it is to help the thinker to believe and the believer to think. In short, we are in their arena, bringing the gospel of Christ to help them traverse the longest journey in life, the journey from the head to the heart. The fivefold thrust of RZIM has always been first and foremost evangelism. We do evangelism undergirded by apologetics. Apologetics is not the main course. It is the seasoning. The gospel is the main message. So we do evangelism. We do it with apologetics, understanding the questions of people. We are involved in training people where they are and within the church, and training our young to be able to answer the questions that are being asked of them. And then spiritual disciplines, because we never want to forget the heart that has to be touched and reached. So we've got evangelism, apologetics, training, and spiritual disciplines. But there is a fifth very important component. And to switch metaphors for just a moment, it was Francis Schaeffer who said evangelism has to walk on 2 feet. Evangelism is the proclamation, compassion and mercy ministries is the other foot with which you walk into arenas. So Wellspring International is the humanitarian arm of RZIM, which is apologetics with a touch. These 5 components of evangelism, apologetics, training, spiritual disciplines, and the humanitarian need. These are the issues that really carry us into various settings. The gospel is a beautiful story. It's a story not just told as fact, but it is told in the attractiveness of who Jesus Christ is and what his forgiveness and grace and transforming power mean. But you can never proclaim that without respecting the honest questioner, so we retain the dignity of the listener and never compromise on the nobility of the gospel. The global reach is critical because the cross-cultural pollination that is going on. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the answer for every culture and every generation. So the global family of humanity is really like what John Wesley would have said, the world is our parish.
Is it historically reasonable? Are the Gospels historically reasonable and reliable to a certain degree that we can measure as historians? And I think we would say yes, they are. And there are reasons for that, for testifying to the resurrection of Jesus. First of all, we don't just have one Gospel, we have 4 Gospels. 4 Gospels that tell us the same thing, that Jesus was raised from the dead. Second of all, we have Paul's letters corroborating this fact that Jesus rose from the dead. In other words, they corroborate one another because many of Paul's letters, most of Paul's letters, in fact, were written before the Gospels. So here's my third point, here's this Jew who at one point is persecuting the church violently, held the jackets and coats of those who stoned Stephen, as we see in the book of Acts. Yet somehow this Jew becomes a believer in Jesus and a follower of Jesus, so much so that he becomes the chief apostle and the chief witness, chief apologist, as you will, for the Christian faith. Now, how do you explain that historically?
And then you have the discovery of the empty tomb being attributed to women. Now, in the first century, women were not considered credible witnesses in a court of law. If a woman witnessed a crime, she could not go to court and testify because her testimony was not taken seriously. So why would the disciples pick women to be the witnesses to the resurrection unless that's really what happened? They were just reporting what happened. And then you have the disciples of Jesus coming to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and like I said, preaching that beginning in Jerusalem and then going all the way to their death. Now, people would die for things that they think are true, even though they're mistaken. They would die for that if they really believe that what they're dying for is true. But if they know that it is not true, if they were making it up, they would have known it wasn't true, and then they would not have been prepared to die for it. And they died in separate places, all convinced that Jesus had appeared to them alive after the crucifixion.
We often find that immediate objection comes up against an anti-supernaturalism. The person is arguing from philosophical naturalism or materialism, in which their world there is no possible intervention in their system. So basically they believe in a universe of cause and effect within a closed system. And the idea, therefore, is that as Christians or religious people, we are somehow invoking a world of fantasy and unbelief. But we believe in a universe of cause and effect in an open system, that there's an agency that can act. So I think what we've got to define, and I know in my own case when I've had this discussion with people talking about miracles and so forth, or the possibility, is that if God exists, by definition, miracles would be logically possible. I mean, if he's a greater being than by which anything else exists, he is the greatest of all, is he omniscient, all-powerful and so forth, then the very name God carries the attributes of the ability to do anything within his system.
And generally speaking, those scholars who presuppose that no God exists will throw up their hands and they will say, we don't know what happened. And I would venture to argue, if your presupposition is that God doesn't exist and that leads you to a dead end, perhaps we can start exploring other presuppositions. Maybe God does exist. We have this whole host of